Breast cancer sucks. I am Sanika Minero and I'm an OBGYN, and today I want to talk about breast cancer. Breast cancer touches everyone and affects everyone. In my particular case, my sister-in-law has breast cancer, friends have breast cancer, colleagues have breast cancer, and many of my patients have breast cancer. It seems that many women either have breast cancer or are surrounded by loved ones that have breast cancer. Can we do something about it? Is there anything we can do about it? As I mentioned before, breast cancer touches everyone and it can affect everyone. Young, old, women, men, people of all races, skin color, or religious denomination. It is estimated that in a lifetime, 1 out of 8 women will develop breast cancer. This is a staggering number. Is there anything that we can do? Are there any preventive measures that we can take to decrease the risk of breast cancer? Statistics show that breast cancer is the most frequently diagnosed cancer in women and is the most common cause of cancer death in women. That 260,000 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer in the U.S. and that 40,000 of these women will die from breast cancer. Globally, the incidence of breast cancer are highest in the industrialized countries like North America, Australia, New Zealand, Western, and North Europe. Incidence of breast cancer have increased, so more and more women are diagnosed with breast cancer every day, more than we have previously seen. Thankfully, the mortality rates from breast cancer have decreased, and this is due to early detection with mammography and other advanced treatments. When we talk about risk factors for breast cancer, things that can increase the risk of breast cancer include age, meaning the longer you live, the higher the risk of getting a breast cancer or other cancers, a family history of breast cancer, a genetic mutation that predisposes to breast cancer, for women, early menses, late menopause, alcohol use, obesity, smoking, dense breast, use of oral contraceptive pills, and use of hormone replacement therapy. Things that can help to decrease the risk of breast cancer include breastfeeding, exercise, maintaining a normal weight, and avoiding environmental exposures to chemicals such as pesticides, preservatives, plastics, and radiation. Now let's talk about screening. Screening includes breast self-awareness, clinical breast exam by a provider, mammography, preferably the 3D mammography because it has a 40% better detection rate than the 2D mammography and it has less recalls. Also, mammogram and an MRI for women that are at high risk. When we talk about breast self-awareness, we're trying to look at what is your normal breast, how does it feel like, what does it look like, to be aware of what your own breasts are like, what are your normal lumps and bumps, and if there's anything different in your normal lumps and bumps on your skin changes, skin color changes, retraction, then to talk to your doctor to get a physical exam and then decide whether you need further testing. A clinical breast exam, on the other hand, is an exam that is done by your provider, and it has about a 50% detection rate, and often the masses that are fine are benign. However, the decision is made at the time whether any further testing needs to be done. Next is screening mammograms. 90% of breast cancer are detected by screening mammograms, and 10% of them are actually missed by mammography, which is the reason why it's so important to know what your breasts feel like, what they look like, and if you see any changes, to talk to your doctor. Now, screening MRIs are done in conjunction with mammograms for women who are at high risk for breast cancer, such women that have genetic mutations as an example. So what are the screening recommendations? Well, it's really all over the place. The recommendation varies depending on the medical society or the governmental sponsor group. As you can see here, many different medical societies have different screening recommendations, whether you start at 40 or you start at 50. When do you stop? Is it every year? Is it 1 to 2 years? Here you see the list of all the recommendations. But I cannot stress enough that you must be your best healthcare advocate. Talk to your medical provider for shared decision making regarding when screening mammography is best for you. This next one is a big slide because it has a lot of information about what are the potential causes for breast cancer. The number one is random errors during cell replication. Our body is constantly making new cells, copying itself, making new skin cells that then get shed, making new gastrointestinal cells that then get shed. And as the cells replicate, there is always a potential for genetic mutations to occur. This increases with age. This happens for breast cancer in particular for women who go through early menses, late menopause, obesity. There are many environmental exposures that can also cause this issue, and also inherited gene mutations. That accounts for about 5 to 10% of the breast cancers that we find. The most common is the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene mutation, but many other are present, and some we have not yet been able to find. This one is an example of a DNA that's making a copy of itself, and you see multiple little proteins. At any point in this duplication process, things can happen and an error can occur. Thankfully, our body is able to fix this error most of the time. Sometimes when this error happens in an important gene like the BRCA gene, our proteins are not able to actually fix the error, and that's when the increased cancer risk happens.
Mistakes in base pairing occur during replication of DNA. DNA can also be damaged by environmental influences such as radiation or exposure to certain chemicals. Such damage can result in alteration of the genetic information. The repair mechanism recognizes and removes incorrect or damaged nucleotides. The undamaged strand serves as a template for replacement with appropriate intact nucleotides.
The puzzle must be put back together in order to decrease the risk of cancer happening. An analogy that is often used is that of typing in a keyboard. If you are writing a letter or sending an email, as you're typing, you can commit many mistakes, whether it's a letter that is missing or the wrong letter that is on the word, and now the word means something else that you mean it to mean. Thankfully, we have a delete button that you're able to just delete that error and replace the letter with the correct letter so that the right message is being sent. That is similar to our DNA, in which when errors occur, our proteins are able to fix that error and replace the correct letter. If, for example, that delete button doesn't work and you're not able to fix the error, you may be sending an email with a message that is not what you intended to send. Similarly, with our DNA, it may be sending the incorrect message, and this message may be to continue replicating, copying in an uncontrolled fashion, which can lead to cancer. Things that can cause errors in the copy mechanism include aging. The longer you live, the more replications you have, and so the higher the chances of errors in that copying mechanism. In the analogy of typing in a keyboard, the longer you type, the higher the chance of errors. Other things that can cause copying errors include environmental damage, like UV damage from the sun, smoking, alcohol, chemical exposures. And if we look at the keyboard typing analogy again, if you feel sick, tired, lacking sleep, or have drank a few too many drinks, you're going to have more typing errors. Here's an example of stem cells. As they're trying to make multiple copies of themselves, they can acquire some errors. And if exposed to these environmental exposures and aging, then those errors can actually replicate, and they're not able to fix it, which can then lead to cancer cells. Other risk of breast cancer is hereditary, meaning passed down from family members. About 5 to 10% of breast cancers are hereditary, and it's most common from the BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene mutation. But as you can see, there are other gene mutations that do increase the risk of breast cancer, including the P53, the P10, LKB1, CDH1, and the MSH1, MSH6, and so on. Much of the human gene is not yet known, and thus other genes may be involved in breast cancer that have not been discovered yet. As an example, a patient who tested negative for all the known mutations, yet has a strong family history of breast cancer in grandmother or aunt or mother or sister, the fact that we haven't found the gene doesn't mean that it isn't there. We just don't have the technology yet to find it. This is why women who have a strong family history of breast cancer have different screening recommendations than women who are considered low risk. It is estimated that 30% of breast cancer can be preventable. So let's focus on that 30% that we can prevent. Eating cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, kale, cauliflower can decrease the risk of breast cancer by 15%. Eating carotenoids like carrots, spinach, kale, orange, squash, tomatoes can decrease the risk of breast cancer by 18 to 28%. That's huge. Decreasing alcohol consumption can decrease the risk of breast cancer by 16%. Also decreasing the processed meats consumption like hot dogs, bacon, sausage, deli meats. For postmenopausal women, that decreases the risk of breast cancer by 64%. That's a huge number. Maintaining a healthy weight can decrease the risk of breast cancer, and also increasing physical activity because it also decreases the percentage of body fat. And body fat is known to cause increased risk of not only breast cancer but multiple other types of cancers. Here's a study that shows that cruciferous vegetables decrease the risk of breast cancer by 15%. Another study showing that carotenoids decrease the risk of breast cancer by 18 to 28%. So eating these vegetables on a regular basis can really decrease our risk of breast cancer, particularly that 30% risk that is what we can modify. This one is a long study, and it talks about alcohol, processed meats, obesity, lack of physical activity, all contributing to an increase of breast cancer and other cancers. Now, why is it that obesity increases the risk of breast cancer and other cancers? We used to think that fat cells, all they did was give us insulation, keep us warm. But more and more research is coming out to show that fat cells actually not only store a lot of hormones, but they also release a lot of hormones and a lot of inflammation proteins. These inflammation proteins and hormones can then increase the chance of DNA damage, particularly of the breast cells. And thus, obesity increases the risk of almost all cancers, not only breast cancer, because of the hormones and the inflammatory proteins that they release. This next slide is talking about carbohydrates and how that turns into fat that can then increase the risk of cancer. So essentially, when we eat carbohydrates, what happens is our pancreas has to release insulin in order to digest those carbohydrates. The insulin itself then allows for storage of fat, more storage of fat, which then makes the fat be able to store hormones and inflammatory process and then also release them. This is the process where then DNA damage can occur due to those hormones and inflammatory cells that are being released by the fat cells. The central obesity, that belly fat, is the worst when it comes to those inflammation mediators. Now, not all carbohydrates are the same. The simple sugars, such as we see here in candy and donuts and sweets, are different than the complex carbohydrates, because the simple sugars make our bodies release even more insulin than the complex carbohydrates that we find in vegetables and fruits. Here we see carbohydrates include bread, pasta, potato, fruit, rice, sugar, and flour. Now let's talk about preservatives. Preservatives we can find in many different types of foods in order to increase its shelf life, and many cosmetics and hygiene products. In this next picture, you're going to see lots of toxic chemicals that are found in many personal care products. You'll be surprised to find that preservatives in cosmetics do not need FDA approval before they go on the market. What they say is cosmetics sold to consumers in stores or online must have a list of ingredients, each listed by its common or usual name. This is important information for consumers who want to find out whether a product contains an ingredient they wish to avoid. Parabens are usually easy to identify by their names, such as methylparaben, polypropylene, and so on and so forth. This assumes that we know what ingredients we're looking at. This makes the assumption that when we look at ingredients, we understand what all those chemicals mean, and we, the consumer, assume that because it's being sold or allowed to be sold in the US, then it must be safe. You can go to Campaign for Safe Cosmetics and you see the red list there, and that gives you the list of the chemicals to avoid in the different health and beauty products. Now let's talk about chemicals. Chemicals that we can get exposed to through the environmental exposures. For this, I went to the NIH, the National Library of Medicine, and there you can click on chemicals and contaminants. And you can see multiple chemicals there, and I will pay attention to pesticides at this time, but you can go into the website and look at the other chemicals. So what are pesticides? Pesticides are chemicals used to kill living things. They kill insects, algae, grass, weed, mosquitoes, bacteria, fungus, and there are many things that actually contain pesticides. Cockroach traps, insect repellents, rat and mouse poison, flea and tick sprays, disinfectants, products that kill mold and mildew, weed killers, bug spray, some swimming pool chemicals. There are some in the air. There's also some in the water, meaning food treated with pesticides can then also contaminate the water. As you can imagine, water contamination is a huge problem because we drink the water, we eat the animals that are in the water, and now we are being exposed to these pesticides that can cause actually DNA damage that can then increase our risk of cancer. Lastly, I want to talk about plastics. For this, I went to Consumer Reports website, and there I found this article, Most Plastic Products Contain Potentially Toxic Chemicals, Study Reveals. This is a new study that came out October 2nd, 2019, or at least it was last updated October 2nd, 2019. Quoting this article, studies in humans link BPA, which is a part of many plastics, to metabolic disease, obesity, infertility, and disorders like ADHD. They also have found they've also found prostate cancer and breast cancer in animals. Also, phthalates, which is another chemical often found in plastics, can affect hormones, which means it can affect the reproductive organs and alter the sperm in males. Unfortunately, BPA can also be found in water bottles, plastic storage container, thermal paper, the lining of food cans, and phthalates are found in many products and often used to make imitation leather and some shower curtains for flexibility. In 2018, the American Academy of Pediatrics published a report saying that some chemicals in plastic, including biphenyls, such as BPA and phthalates, may put children's health at risk and recommended that families reduce exposure to them. Unfortunately, many of us don't know this data, and many of us are not aware of this recommendation by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And based on this new data, it's extremely important that we cut down on our plastic exposures by eating fresh foods, avoiding plastics whenever we can, meaning using stainless steel metals and aluminum for cooking, using glass when we can. Don't store your foods in plastic containers. Definitely don't heat up plastic. As mentioned previously, our body really does respond to what it is exposed to. Things that we have some control over and things that we have no control over. Pollutants in the air, bad chemicals in our water supply, bad chemicals in our food, such as preservatives, meat preservatives, plastics. Eating excess food can also cause storage fat, which then also increases our risk of cancer, radiation exposure, and sedentary lifestyle. Breast cancer really does suck. Breast cancer and other cancers can occur for many different reasons. 2/3 of it we cannot prevent yet. I'm hoping technology advances. 1/3 of it we can prevent by modifying risk factors. As I always say, we cannot escape our genes, which is the genetic framework we are born with, but we can decrease the injury to it whenever we can. In summary, lifestyle changes can decrease the risk of breast cancer by 1/3 by having healthy eating, limiting alcohol, preservatives, pesticides, plastics, radiation exposure, increasing physical activity, but also can be very helpful to decrease the risk of other medical conditions as well and other cancers. Lastly, I want to leave you with this. Vote with your wallet. As consumers, we influence what is sold to us, and if we refuse to buy products that have bad chemicals in it, we'll start seeing healthier food choices available to us. The goal is to live long, healthy, and active. Please share, as knowledge is never wasted. Now go and kick ass.